traveling and coming back by then. How many tigers are there?
So, good morning, and welcome to this session. I think everybody is concerned about what's happening to our planet, and that's something that we will discuss here, this panel of extremely eminent people. To my extreme right is Ajay Mathur, who headed our negotiations at the recently concluded Paris talks, which ended in the Paris Agreement. Ajay is an old energy expert and will be now heading the Energy Research Institute in Delhi. On my right is Mr. Jairam Ramesh, who was our Environment Minister amongst many other important positions that he has held. He's a different kind of politician. He does other stuff apart from politics. He does politics, but he does other interesting stuff too, and he's had an interest in the environment. On my left is Valmik Thapar. Those of you who are interested in wildlife would know who he is. He has dedicated his life to animals and to the tiger and to conservation and to sanctuaries. And on my left is Shoumatoff, who has done a lot of very good work, investigative journalism, if you will, investigative research, if you will, on different ecosystems, different kinds of animals, different kinds of species, their destruction, their conservation, etc. So we really have an excellent panel, and I'd like to start by giving them a big hand. So I think we will start with Ajay, because Ajay has just come back from Paris, and I would like to ask him that as we discuss this, red signals, green hopes, what does that mean? The kinds of barriers that we are facing and the kinds of hopes that we all have that these barriers to environmental integrity would disappear, that they should just go away. We all hope that. It's not happening. But we would like to hear from Ajay what he experienced in Paris. Where have we gone from the Kyoto Protocol to the Paris Agreement? Where are we? How big are these red signals internationally? So Ajay, would you like to tell us in about a couple of minutes the big broad strokes of what happened?
Well, Paris, in my view, was a game changer. It was a game changer because not just people, but governments recognized that change is needed, that everybody on the world has to act differently. This, I think, has been a major change. Many people went to Paris believing that we could continue with business as usual. Clearly, that's not the case after Paris. Second, there is a broad agreement that every country needs to do action, but what I and India will do will be different from, example, what somebody else in some other country will do, and therefore this has to be based on what makes sense for you as a person, as a country. Third, that as we go ahead, there must be a system which tells us what have we done, what have we accomplished, and do we need to speed up our various actions. These are the three big things that came out of Paris. Now, if you ask me, is it enough? No, it's not. But what is intrinsic in this agreement is this nature of the fact that we constantly look at what we have done and the possibility of tightening it as time goes by. This, hopefully, together with public participation, and one of the central things here is the need for transparency in reporting what countries have done. This transparency, I hope, and with the participation of you and I, would convert this into something where we will hold our governments and the world accountable for where we have gone, and more importantly, for where we have not gone. To sum it up, all of us matter. All of us will do things together. All of us will do things in a manner that can be seen, reported, and acted on by each one of us.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a very quick question. Did you think that Paris was a positive imbalance, or do you think that that Paris was imbalance?
Well, For somebody like me, it was positive.
I want to hear from the audience. Who thinks that Paris was positive? Who thinks that Paris was zero? And who thinks Paris was positive?
Positive, I heard.
Same to same. Who thinks it was a disaster? There's one person there who says that Paris was bad. So we have a very different kind of perception here about what Paris was. Hearing it so-called from the horse's mouth, it's good to know that Ajay thinks that in the balance it was better than worse. But yes, we can take this up in the discussion and you can tell us, especially the gentleman there who thought it was a disaster, why he thinks it was a disaster. I would ask Jairam Ramesh, because he's been inside the national policy making process, and he should tell us. Jairam, I'd ask you to tell them briefly, what have successive Indian governments done? Not only the government that you were involved with, the government now, the government's past. How has India tried to handle the conflict between its huge red alarm signals and the desire to go green, to go forward, go sustainable? How have our governments handled that?
Well, we've gone through phases of this trade-off between economic growth and environmental protection. We had in the 70s and the early 80s a slew of progressive legislation. In the wake of crisis at that point of time, we had the Air Pollution Control Act, the Water Pollution Control Act, the Forest Conservation Act, the Environment Protection Act, and many other legislation. However, our enthusiasm to pass legislation has not been matched by an enthusiasm to enforce the legislation. So while we have on paper some of the best laws in the world, in terms of enforcement and compliance, I'm afraid it leaves a lot to be desired. And the reason for that is because there is, in the short run at least, a perceived conflict between the objective of generating jobs, the objective of getting new investment, the objective of pushing GDP growth, and the objective of protecting natural resources. Now, there is no conflict really, because if you want growth to be sustainable, you have to do it in a manner that is sustainable ecologically and that protects your natural resources. However, there is in the mindset of all governments, and there is really no exception to this, in the mindset of all governments, there is a trade-off, there is a conflict between these two, and I'm afraid in 99.99% of the cases, the choices when they are made, they are in favor of boosting economic growth and not necessarily on protecting the environment. So I think that's a reality that we have to contend with. And we have to understand really why is it that governments, irrespective of political ideologies, end up paying obeisance to the objective of environmental protection, but when it comes to actual action, end up paying obeisance to GDP growth.
I think here I will go back to what Ajay said. It has to be participatory. Governments want to get re-elected, they want the vote, so they want to show big flagship things. They don't want slow conservative things like environment. Ajay just said before Jairam did that we need participation. How many of you think that we can actually force governments, and why has it not happened so far? I'm sure Valmik will talk about that when we get around to him. But a very quick answer, how do you think we can do it better in forcing governments? Jairam said very candidly, governments will go with growth at the cost of the environment. Do we as civil society have it in us to do something more than we've done so far? Quick ones. If you'll have to give me a reason why, but let me go and how. But let me go back to Jairam very quickly. You know, China is held up to us as an example of how wonderful everything is. Their economy is about 10 times ours, and they have done it by destroying their environment. Is this something that the Indian government has to deal with? Does this come up in discussion? Look at China.
Well, I think the temptation to follow the grow now, pay later model is very, very strong. The US did it, Europe did it, Brazil did it, China did it. So why should India be different? So this grow now, pay later, that you have 20, 25 years of rapid economic growth and worry about the consequences of economic growth subsequently is ingrained in Indian decision making. And one has to understand why we need to be different. It's not enough to say that we should be different. Why do we need to be different? And I think that's really, and you talked about public participation and public involvement, putting pressure on systems of governance to take decisions differently. I think this will come when there is a widespread recognition of why India needs to be different from the way the Chinese have got high economic growth or the way the rest of the world did. And very briefly and telegraphically, I would say that there are 4 reasons why India must be a departure from the grow now, pay later. First is a demographic reason. I mean, we are today 1.25 billion and we are going to add 400 million people in the next 30 years. There's no country in the world with, most countries are seeing declining population, including China for that matter. And we are going to be the country that's going to add 1/3 of our current population in the next 3 decades. So sustainable development for us is not a luxury, it becomes a necessity. Second, as Ajay said, the climate change argument. We may not have caused global warming in the past, but we certainly have maximum vulnerability to global warming in terms of monsoon, glaciers, forest cover, mean sea levels. There's no country in the world which has these multiple dimensions of vulnerability. Third, and this I would say is the most important and urgent argument for the departure from grow now, pay later, is that environment is having a public health impact. Enormous public health impact. You are already beginning to see in terms of air pollution. Water pollution has always had an impact. It's been a silent killer as far as India is concerned. And chemical contamination also has been a very serious issue. So there's a public health argument. And finally, there is this argument about livelihoods. In most Western countries, when you talk of environment, you talk of lifestyles. In our country, even today, even with being the world's 3rd largest economy, the fastest growing economy, even today, environmental issues largely are livelihood issues and less of lifestyle issues. So I think India must make up its mind. When I say India must make up its mind, the dominant discourse has to be that we cannot afford the grow now, pay later model, and that we need to make choices which will give us 8% economic growth, but at the same time protect our forests, protect our rivers, protect our mountains, protect our air and our water. I think it's possible, and it's possible when systems of public participation, as Ajay also said, begin to put pressure on the governance systems to make things differently.
Absolutely. I think we'll keep coming back to participation, public pressure, what civil society can do, what you and I can do. So let's keep that strand with us. And if anyone has smart ideas, please write them out on a piece of paper and hand them to the festival organizers or to any one of us. Valmik, let me come to you. Valmik Thapar has been very closely involved, apart from wildlife and nature, also in looking at public policy and looking at the kinds of policies that are being made by the Indian governments and where they are failing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that to give a sense of...
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that because 40 years of my life have gone in this. And our biggest problem are the governments. And our biggest problem is that everyone will go to international platforms and national platforms and talk about how we are going to change course, what is the quality of life we are going to bring. But they forget one really important thing. The mechanism of governance to bring that change in every district of India is nearly non-existent. The level of ignorance in government servants, right from the patwari upwards, who take little important decisions from the village, for the town, for the city, nobody has dealt with. The red signals dot our map. Puffs of poison come out from our cities. And we still go on talking. I am tired of that. I remember when I worked with Jairam, and I'm going to give you this example because I don't want to get into an argument. He and I have been old friends. When I worked with him, one of the most interesting ideas that we worked on, which was an original idea of mine, Jairam came as Minister of Environment and Forest, was to create a different mechanism in the Ministry of Environment and Forest. We both agreed that there should be a department that protects our natural resource for forest and wildlife. And the story is absolutely horrendous, but it shows you where we are. And my job today is to be frank and brutal. At a National Board of Wildlife meeting, when I presented this idea to our then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Jairam was the Minister of Environment and Forest. After presenting the idea, he turned to Jairam and said, "Do it." Just these two words, "Do it." Make this department, clear the secretary's massive files that are dumped across the table and under the table. And I've been in this ministry for 25 years, running the corridors of this ministry. So there's very little I don't know about it. We came and celebrated, Jairam and me, that evening in my house. I then sat with Jairam and we worked out a really dream structure of a department. I took all the graphics to make printouts so his ministry had the detail, how we were going to develop and build a dream department, really make this ministry tick so it affects and impacts the states and the states could do something different. In typical Indian government style, and it goes on to this day, in every little sphere, 1 year rolled by. He and I worked very fast and then everything went silent. The next National Board of Wildlife meeting came and I asked Dr. Manmohan Singh, I said, what on earth happened to your idea? You instructed Jairam Ramesh to make a separate department.
That would be my idea, not your idea.
The reply was very simple. He turned to a gentleman called Mr. T.K. Nair, who was his principal secretary, and said, "What happened? A year and a half has gone by." He said, "Sir, the committee of secretaries overruled your idea." And very silently, this was accepted. A prime minister's dictate to his minister of environment and forest on what to do was overruled by a committee of secretaries. Now, I'm not going to go into the inter-service rivalries, but take that to the next stage. Go to the district collector, go to the forest officer, the environmental cell in the district. Let's start working at the level we should work. Let's go to each district. The Rajasthan government has recently created a competition as a beginning. How do you get a low carbon footprint in every district? So all the districts of Rajasthan, the collectors are competing. They're trying to understand in this district where are the most important puffs of poison. How are we going to change course to reduce that? I'm not saying it can end, but there has to be a process to minimize it, because the bureaucracies of this country, more than the politicians, and believe me, after 40 years I'm telling you this, are absolutely abominable. They prevent innovative thinking, they prevent public participation. You can't have genuine public-private partnerships. There are very few ministers like Jairam who had an open office and who welcomed new ideas. The bureaucracy will prevent that idea, and you really find it tough in India to go and find a path in this minefield. One, yap about the great things we are doing, and two, go to any district and ask the district collector or any government service, what does climate change mean? What does global warming mean? We haven't started our basic education. So I believe, I'm not going to say more now because I can go on and on this, that the 5 to 8 million government servants in this country require to be educated about what needs to be done. If you don't do that, nothing is going to happen.
From the resonance that I see to Valmik's analysis of what is holding this country back, the vicious stranglehold of the bureaucracy, how many of you agree with that? And many of you don't?
The other half
How
say
many?
politicians are responsible.
I can see one who has got his dharma has got to say, make him say that, but how many of you think the bureaucracy is not responsible for what Valmik has just explained? You think it's not responsible? Who is? Who is responsible? Somebody is. Sorry?
The mutual understanding and the mutual existence of the whole project is not there. Like the politician and the parties are working at their own level, and the individuals are not being educated for the cause.
You think that that's a mishmash? Can we have a mic going around so that people can say their piece? A quick one before we start with Alex. Somebody else, while that mic is coming on, somebody else wants to say something? A or many?
Hello.
Quick one.
It is the nexus between corporates and politicians.
Nexus between corporates and politicians.
That's what, the same thing, the difference between the corporates, politicians, individuals and every other organization.
So now we're saying something else. We're moving away from the public sector to the private. So for government and politicians.
The private sector must, because it's one of the most powerful sector and the
Sure.
leading sector in the country.
Anyone else who has a view, and then we will go back to our speakers. Quick one.
What I'm missing is civic society. I mean, I'm from Europe, so I'm reluctant to. I won't get
Go ahead.
involved into discussion on Indian bureaucracy, and it's maybe not as bad in Europe, but it's also a problem, the bureaucracy and the politics.
It doesn't have much to say.
But
That's the
the
problem.
hope is that there is millions, if you add it up, and people have done this, about 200 million people in the world who are leading all kinds of civic society organization, from environment to social justice and everything in between. And I think the connection both from politics and bureaucracy and organizations have to be with this third domain.
Yeah, sure.
Just to answer your point, there are a lot of people who are engaged with the third domain. It's been a part of our lives. It's quite a difficult one. At the moment, that third domain is being strangulated. It's not easy for a non-governmental organization or an outspoken non-governmental individual to find a path right now. Is not easy. They've suffered tremendously. We have all kinds of strange ways to make them suffer. I won't give you examples of that right now because our speaker to the left hasn't had a chance. So just to tell you that that's something which is a part of our lives.
Comes back to public participation. We'll come back to that before the session closes. Alex, last but not least, as the old cliche goes, would you want to tell us your international experiences about what is getting destroyed, what is getting conserved, what have you seen that gives you hope, and what have you seen that makes you despair?
Okay, well, let me just, I have a sort of I just wanted to segue from Margaret Atwood's remark,
ahead.
because there's anything that I take away from what I'm going to tell you, City Lights Books, small press started by the beat poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who was a friend of my beatnik brother around 1960. There is a book called Learning to Die in the Anthropocene by Roy Scanlon, I think his name is, which is the most profound and thought-provocative book about the times that we are in now. And I can't recommend it more highly.
Do you want to say that name again so that everybody gets it?
Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. Now, the Anthropocene, maybe not all of you know, that's a new term which is the era that we are now in where humans are having a dominant effect on the life support systems, the other species that are here with us. And I just want to say that I've actually been involved for 50 years. I've got you by 10 years there. Going back to 1970. 1970 is a very important date because several things begin to happen. The parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere start to rise. This is man's hockey stick, almost vertically. They've been rising since 1750, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Prior to 1750, for 200,000 years, they never got up to 200,000 ppms. Suddenly they shoot up. What else happens? The temperature shoots up. And if you look at, even though it's rather nippy here, we didn't quite prepare to how nippy it is here, and the temperature everywhere in the world is shooting up vertically. Last year was the hottest year globally, and I've done the research. I've been to the Mauna Loa Observatory on the big island of Hawaii, which has conducted the longest ongoing measurement of atmospheric carbon since 1959. When they started, it was 250 parts per million. Guess what it is now? 400 parts per million. Now, what else happened in 1970? Since 1970, there's a study which I reference. I recommend you go to my website, dispatchesfromthevanishingworld.com, which I started in 2001 to document the disappearance of species and ecosystems and indigenous cultures. In 1970, since then, half of the individual animals in this global meta-study population of animal populations have been killed. The actual numbers of these populations have been cut in half. Another study has 30% of the species on Earth disappearing, I think, very soon, by mid-century. I just want to tell you what I am not an authority on India. I am somebody who has been able, because this is a writers' conference, I have been able to write things that have changed policy. And if you go to my website, you'll see dispatches from the Vanishing World. The dispatch number 69 is called Agony in Ivory. That was in Vanity Fair. That started this movement, the ongoing movement that has just stopped, resulted in Hong Kong, the biggest market for ivory, banning ivory sales.
Oh, wow.
So this is really good. You can do this. The word, as Margaret Atwood said, is very powerful. You can change policy. You know, I did a thing also in 1990 about the first big piece, that was also in Vanity Fair, about the ethnocide of Tibet by the Chinese. And Papa Bush, you know, President Bush Sr. was so moved that he invited the Dalai Lama to the White House, which nobody had dared to do. So you can do this with writing. You can look at my stuff. I'm going to explain in the long form session how I actually write to make. You have to make people care, and then you get a crucial momentum of people who are demanding change. And if it's not a dictatorship, if it's a democracy, your representatives had better do what you're asking them to do, or you would vote in somebody else. Now, I know that it's much more complicated in India, and India has got some really horrendous problems, as you know. As the population problem is just, the population growth is it's already, basically there are too many people, too many of us on the planet, but particularly in India. And how do you stop that? I don't think you can say, okay, from now on you can only have one kid. That's not going to go over in India. But you can have female empowerment. And that's a big movement. A very, very old friend, my old Harvard roommate, Judith Bruce, started the Population Council, and she's been doing this since 1970. She was a pioneer of this. If you can persuade a woman in a village not to get married at 14, but to go to the big city, Delhi or the nearest city, and have a good time until she's 18, and then have her first kid, that makes a huge effect on population growth. And female empowerment is a huge thing. There's a lot of great things that are going on. Now, I have my friend Variel, who's just flown in from, we'll just be talking very soon about Borneo and palm oil. I hope I'm not going on too long, but I'm trying to. So, Variel is involved with the Barefoot College. Have you heard about that? That's one of the great initiatives where villages, poor villages, off the modern grid, the grandmothers get solar panels, so they can, sure, thank you. So they can, the grandmothers put together these solar panels. It gives them a sense of self-worth. It gives the village power off the grid and income as they're making more and more of these solar panels. It's one of the most brilliant initiatives that I've heard of. And you can talk to Varial here, but you want to stand up because he is here not to see me. It's purely by accident, but is here to gather support to get the word out about this initiative. Now, let me just finally, maybe I just have one word.
Two quick final.
Okay. I have a book coming out about Borneo, where I've been twice. I spent, the first time I went to see Biruti Galdikas, who has dedicated her lives to the orangutans of Borneo. And the second time, Varial and I camped with the Penan, the last nomadic Penan hunter-gatherers in Sarawak, who still hunt with blowguns. Lovely, gentle people, and their forest is being, it's up in the highlands, is being destroyed by loggers. Down in Kalimantan, I didn't know this, and I had written a piece for Vanity Fair, which I recommend you read, called A Day in the Life of a Modern Consumer, which outlines everything, every effect that we're doing since from the moment we turn on our light, our bedroom light. This laptop, all your cell phones, you realize that you are killing the gorillas and the last okapis in Congo because it has a little strip of coltan, which is this very rare metal that has a very high melting temperature. So they put these capacitors in these things. And I've been to the camps. You can read that on my website. I think it's Dispatch 2 about the guys that are, these are just artisanal miners, and the guy has an AK-47, he goes out and kills gorillas and okapis, and they eat them.
Oh.
And so that's just one thing. All right, so, okay, I have some more points, but
can we
come back?
Yeah, we can come back, and then the audience will seek you out and crush you with questions, I'm sure.
Can I just respond to the question that was raised?
Very quickly.
And very briefly.
Yeah.
As Valu said, India has a very active, very vibrant, very vocal, very aggressive civil society movement. And all the great milestones in environmental decision making in India have been influenced profoundly by civil society organizations. But the problem arises is that civil society organizations are dealing with democratically elected governments. And in democracies, ultimately, my philosophy has always been that civil society must have its say, but democratically elected governments ultimately will have their way. The problem arises when civil society organizations arrogate to themselves all power and all wisdom and do not allow governments to function. And that's where you have a breakdown of law and order, and you have tensions. But the point that you make is absolutely true, and what Valu says, that in the last couple of years, the shrinking space for civil society, particularly on matters relating to environment, is a cause for great worry, and is actually weakens democratic foundations.
I'd just like to say on that, Jairam, that a committee of secretaries is not a democratically elected body. And if they overturn decisions by civil society or
I think this is a complete misreading of government. Committee of secretaries is a body to which ministers delegate their powers. So you cannot say that committee of secretaries is not a democratically elected government. Committee of secretaries decisions ultimately go back to ministers, go back to cabinet, go back to democratically elected people. So I have a slightly different view on this than Valu.
All right, so culpability is laid now at different doors. One very quick round, and picking up from solar. Ajay, we talk about renewable and the great white hope of solar, 100,000 megawatt. Is this real? Can it happen? Because a lot of people are thinking we're going solar and we're going to solve our energy problems, but there are issues there. Can you give us a quick feel?
Sure. Day before yesterday, we opened our latest orders of solar power, and the prices tumbled even further. So now
In Rajasthan.
in Rajasthan, 4 rupees 33 paisa for a kilowatt hour of
This
electricity.
is what Sun Edison is saying.
No, this is now a Finnish company called Fortum which is providing this. Nevertheless, it's still twice as much as electricity from other sources. But I think what you need to look at is that in 5 years, the price has declined from 18 rupees a kilowatt hour to 4.35. It's going in the right direction. Having said that, is everything okay? Of course not. You need 4 megawatts of solar to provide as much electricity as 1 megawatt of coal. Remember that. That's one. Second, solar disappears at night. We need electricity at night. Where does that come from? You need some storage. You either need gas, or you need batteries, or you need pumped storage. In other words, for every megawatt of solar, you also need to invest in a megawatt or half a megawatt or a third of a megawatt of something else to provide electricity when the solar is not doing it. Are we there? No, we are not. But I think it is on the right track. The economics is on the right track. The policies, what is it, the policies? The numbers, the interest is on the right track. If you ask me, it is a matter of time.
Okay.
So what we can discuss is whether it can happen in 5 years or whether it happen in 15 years.
Okay. Do
But-
you think 5 or 15?
I believe in the 15 number. I don't believe in the 5 number. Okay. Because of the kinds of issues that
Right.
happen. Nevertheless, this is not to say that things can't happen, and I want to come back to the point of civil society. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, what we looked at was that each one of us has lights in our homes. To provide that light, you need electricity. You're burning coal somewhere, it's producing carbon dioxide, creating all kinds of pollution. Can we get light but use less electricity, produce less pollution? Sure. Move to LEDs. LEDs cost a lot. To cut a long story short, new business model provides LEDs to everybody at 10 rupees a month. If you move to LEDs, the savings that you make are more than 10 rupees a month. So what you're paying is less than that. This civil society, we needed to get civil society involved. There is a website where you can actually see how many LEDs have been sold through this program. The number now is 50 million.
I bought part of them.
You got them. In this state, of these 50 million, 7 million have been sold in this state. Price less than 100 rupees.
Yep.
Payable 10 rupees a month on your electricity bill. Short point, you can make things that you and I can actually do. This is easy to do. You can make things which make a difference. You can get people to ask, why is my state not doing it? Why is my city not doing it? In other words, 4 things that make environmental sense. It is possible to have business models. It is possible to have public participation. It is possible to have impact. The need is to put those things together.
Thank you. I think that's wonderful to end on a green hope. And I don't think 15 years is a very long period. So if you can see something happening, I think that we're ending with Ajay's take on this as a very positive thing with something that has been demonstrated.
But can I just say that in spite of all the optimistic picture that has been painted by Ajay Mathur, which I'm sure will materialize, India will still need.
Yep.
This is the reality of India. In spite of 100 gigawatts of solar, in spite of 60 gigawatts of wind, India will still need to increase its coal consumption at least 2.5 times
what it is now.
India will need to increase its nuclear capacity at least 5 times. This is the conundrum that India has, that we need massive amounts of solar, we need massive amounts of energy efficiency, but at the same time, given our demographic realities and our economic growth challenges, we'll need to at least double, if not triple, our coal consumption in the next 15 years, and we'll need to almost increase our nuclear capacity for 3 to 5 times.
Technology, technology, technology is where we need to head to reach some of these goals. Valmik, your last take, a green hope.
My green hope or out of the box idea is quite simple. We have a system that governs India, and I'm focused on India, so please excuse me because that's an important issue for the whole world. We have 700 districts that make up the map of India, roughly.
Somebody brought it.
And every district has a budget. So I'll give you an example. Sahai, where Ranthambore Tiger Reserve is, has roughly a budget of 800 crores a year, which is supervised by the district collector. In this money, rolling for 60 or 65 years are hundreds of schemes. Some which minimize the use of bad energy. There's a lot of alternative energy, there's a lot of solar energy, there's a budget to protect forests, there's a budget to keep things going the right way. I am suggesting as a green hope that we need to examine these budgets in terms of how we are administered and outsource a green commissioner who extricates this money and focuses only on it. Outsourced meaning he is not necessarily a government servant. We've had a lot of administrative reform suggestions about lateral inductions in this sector and in other sectors. Few listen, but in every district, if we had someone who would use already available money and focus it in the right way, it will start to make a difference on our carbon footprint. I know you may have to have a huge amount of coal consumption, but let's start at that level in the district where we have a focused approach to a strategy. Everything is there, but it gets dissipated. So one green hope is to have people looking at this issue right down there to see how we can restructure the working of district administration to make it much greener than it is.
Thank you. So participation again and diversification, I would say. Alex, your last words.
Okay, first of all,
The green hope.
I think the first thing that everybody has to do is educate themselves on what's happening. Now, right at the moment, there are these terrible peat fires that have been burning out of control in Borneo, and this is the oldest rainforest on Earth where the orangutans, many undiscovered species are just going up in smoke. The orangutans, they're just talking with Doctor, have been suffocating from smoke inhalation. They're starving to death. If you go online, you can see these emaciated, half-dead orangutans. And who is the biggest consumer of palm oil? India. Which has replaced ghee as the main cooking oil, which is great because ghee is artery clogging. It's a complicated issue, but we don't have to have progress, bringing people into the modern consumer society and the free market capitalist democracy has a real downside. It doesn't have to. It shouldn't destroy the planet, and it will, unless people stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to make this big shift to a more compassionate civilization. You may have heard that phrase, which is what I see this whole gathering is all about. However, the population of India is growing much faster than people can be brought into and given the benefits of the modern, such as they are, society. My final point is, I just stumbled on this, you can do the research on all of this. A lot of it is online. You talk to people, but think outside the box. And I'll give you an example. I was studying meditation in Kathmandu at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, and my meditation master said, practice the giving and receiving meditation, where you breathe in the suffering of the world and then you breathe out love and to all sentient beings. So I'm doing this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm breathing in oxygen and I'm breathing out CO2. Don't they have this backwards? a bit. I'm contributing to the CO2 problem. And the guru, my guru said, you know, you think too much. So I did a little research. My brother is a Tibetan Buddhist. He got me into all of this. Each of us takes 25,000 breaths a day. I had no idea. That seems a lot, but that apparently is true. Multiply that by 1.25 billion people. What is the effect of that? You know, on top of all the other emissions from our fossil fuels, I don't know. So
But
if any of you...
your green hope cannot be that we stop breathing.
No, we can't stop breathing, but that just shows, how sort of, implicated we are, and we have to sort of unimplicate it. Wangari Maathai, good glass green hope, the Nobel Prize winning founder of the Green Belt movement of Kenya. I talked to her about this, and she said, well, each of us needs to plant a tree.
Good point.
To offset our lifetime emissions.
Yeah, so we all need to plant trees if we want to continue breathing. We have some time, and I'd like to hear from the audience. The gentleman in front. Is there another mic going around this side?
Environment and ecology. I think in the corridors of power, these are keywords which are unmentionable even today, regardless of the efforts made by Jairam and his team. On the other hand, the bureaucrat will do nothing and the politician will only talk. So I'll just say the only possibility and the green hope is to get a groundswell going. It's a democracy, for God's sakes. And if the writers can get together, if the educators can get together, if we all can get together, that's the only way to drum up support and make the democracy work.
Yeah.
Public participation, this side. Green hopes now. Don't tell us how bad everything is. Green hopes.
Thank you for the panel. I just have one fundamental question, actually. So we're talking about green hopes, and we're talking about, with all due respect to orangutans, but maybe it's a little bit rich coming from us when we talk about green hope, when you realize that there are 200 to 300 million Indians and several more people across the world who do not have access to basic electricity. Where does that question come in? Where does that come into the discourse of grow now, pay later? Why is that something we don't talk about enough when we talk about decreasing our own carbon footprints? But what about those people? They are a huge part of the India that we live in.
Thank you for making that point to bring perspective. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd just like to hear from the policymakers.
Can we get some questions from you guys first? Yeah. Will you pass it backward? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question, I think, to Mr. Mathur, is that I don't know if I can believe what we hear in the media, but a lot of the damage has been done by the first world in terms of climate change. And we also hear that they refuse to take responsibility for the enormous amount of damage that they have done. Have they started taking responsibility, or are they still trying to dump a lot of it on the third world countries who have a lot of other problems as well?
Should we do that at the end? Some more questions? Yeah.
Hello. Should I? Can we? It will be better if we can follow the Germany model.
Germany
model of solar energy, where almost every household is having solar power on their rooftops. So once you have the solar panels on the rooftop, plus the net metering system,
right,
which motivates the consumer to earn while he's spending on the electricity, and in the net he might even save the amount. So that will go a long way in saving the natural resources.
That will certainly go some way. I don't know how long, but yeah.
My question is in similar vein to the previous two questions. So my question is to Mr. Mathur. You spoke about how Paris was a positive. So there are two ways of looking at Paris. One is when you look that the world is deteriorating and the environment is deteriorating, so Paris may be positive for the world. But the Paris Climate Summit was also about international environmental negotiations, and you were the representative of the Indian stance. So from the perspective of India, do you see it as a positive in that there's been a change where we have now binding emissions through the INDCs, previously we didn't, through the CBDR process, and Sunita Narayan has raised this point about how we need to differentiate poor emissions from rich emissions. For instance, the village housewife who cooks with a chula cannot be equated with industrial pollutant. The dhobi who burns coal in his iron cannot be equated industrial. So, what is your perspective on the whether Paris was positive for India? Thank you.
Any other Paris question for Ajay? Then he can quickly respond to that. Any other Paris question? All right, Ajay, will you just quickly respond?
Okay, very quickly. One of the positive things about Paris was that each country put up what it can do. So the Indian INDCs said what we can do, to the point of yes, there are lifeline emissions and there are emissions that are much more economic based and therefore are amenable to So, you know, when Mr. Ramesh was the minister, my minister, we had introduced a program for industry that they must become more efficient. They had a 3-year period which ended last year. The industry ended up saving 20% more than their target. Right? So yes, it is up to us. We decide as a country where is it that we would like action to occur. This goes back to the point that yes, we need to make sure that everybody has access to clean energy. There are 120 million Indians who still use biomass for cooking. You know, see the amount of health impacts that they have. We need to ensure that they have access to cleaner cooking fuels. This biomass, zero carbon dioxide. Cleaner cooking fuels, positive carbon dioxide. But it's a transition that we need to make. Short point. At the end of the day, it is what makes people's lives better while at the same time ensuring that the world moves to a lower carbon path. I think it is up to us as a country, and clearly public participation is important. But what I believe that the Paris agreements have done is provided the framework in which it is possible for us to do that.
Another set of questions. I think you need to answer the young lady who asked whether the common differentiator moved anywhere.
The short point is there is no mea culpa. Nevertheless, we can sit back in a corner and say, I am not going to play this game till a mea culpa comes. We will all drown together. The point is, we need to act. Even if we were not part of the problem, I would like us to be the leaders in the solution. Whether it is solar, whether it is LED bulbs, we will be the world's #1. Let's look at this as an opportunity. Because a very large number of us still don't have access to adequate energy, we have the huge opportunity to create these new business models which can go to the rest of the world.
Sure.
I look at that.
Any other questions before we conclude?
Hello, my question is regarding what Mr. Mathur said, that green hope is possible and conservation is possible by many people. But I think the greatest problem is the knowledge gap that many people, like Mr. Thapar said, there are around 700 districts. So people don't even know that conservation is necessary and climate change is a reality. So how do you get that knowledge gap to cover up? Thank you.
Can I just take that? Because I think we go on saying that people don't know. People do know.
Yeah.
Gene Campaign has been conducting surveys in rural areas. They'll tell you how it's changing. They'll also trying to cope with it. I think where the gap exists is what Valmik was saying, that there is a local response. We need to step that up.
And you need to educate much more the government officer. He doesn't know, and I have senior ones sitting here and they're all not there. I have senior police officers and senior forest officers in this audience, and they know from their colleagues that they don't know, and they are in charge of decision making. And people like Jairam and other bureaucrats who are traveling across the world need to make sure politically that this gap is dealt with. You cannot have ignorant decision makers taking decisions for the poor of this country. You have to educate them in their training courses from the right from the bottom to the top. It's not there. It's not in Missouri. You are not getting enough information on this. And for God's sake, let's clean up that act.
Amen.
Okay.
There's one question.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I just came in the session,
short question,
and
please.
one of the things that has always intrigued me is that there is a lot of talks, and we've been talking for a long time. What's happening, what the problems are. My question to each one of you is this: how do we involve and engage those who are not present in this tent? They are the adults, the students, administrators, and such. How do we really engage and involve? There is no shortage of talking, printed matter,
Completely correct.
all about international conferences and all that thing. But they all go to waste.
I know. So
So
can we do
please,
this? Can we get our cups of tea and talk to each other about how we can do this? And Alex is dying to say something.
Involve and engage.
You're right.
Who are not in this tent.
Totally. I think you make a very valid point. Alex,
Okay, I just want to make very quickly this final point for me to give to you, is that study the things that work. All political systems are flawed, I hate to tell you, whatever they are. The American system is just as flawed as any of them that I belong to. You study things like the Green Belt movement of Wangari Maathai, the late Nobel Prize winner, which restored the environment, empowered females, and it stood up to the same kind of politics that you guys are facing. Now, I just want to leave you with a fable, an animal fable that Wangari told me, because it's about what you can do, what can I do, what we all ask ourselves. And this is a fable about a hummingbird, South American Indian fable, Amerindian fable, and the forest is on fire. All the animals have fled the fire except for the little hummingbird who is going to a spring and scooping up little slivers of water with its beak and going back to the flames and dumping these little drops of water. And the other animals say, "Oh, what do you think you're doing, foolish little bird?" And the hummingbird says, "I'm doing what I can." So we can all do that. And 100,000 hummingbirds can make a difference, believe me.
I think we just have 2 minutes. Maybe we can have a line from each one of you for a green hope.
So, Jairam, do you want to come? Do you want to come? I think we've all said our green hopes.
We've said our green hopes, but my green hope is that we are more inclusive and open and sharing decision making. We can no longer be a very closed government versus non-government grouping. We need to join hands, the best inside, the best outside, and allow for a much greater degree of decision making, less vested interests in how people are appointed and where they go. We need much more transparency here.
And participation. I think we've used this word participation right through. Those of you who are interested in climate change, I'm sorry for doing this, but there is a book that I brought out on climate change. It's there in Narayan Nivas. Nothing comes to me, it goes to a team campaign, just to explain that. But anyone who's interested, it's a nice picture book on climate change, what it does, where it affects, how, and therefore if you're interested, do take a look. Thank you very much to my panelists. Thank you Ajay, thank you Jairam, thank you Valmik, and thank you Alex. I think it's been great.
And once again, thank you Alex, thank you Valmik, thank you Suman, Mr. Jairam Ramesh and Ajay Mathur. Thank you so very much for being here.